Hello, everyone. I am Kevin Gallagher with the Aces Jiu-Jitsu interview series, podcast series, anything you want to call it. It's a new series we got going on, a new publication we got going on. Some exciting things we're doing with that, and in particular, I'm having an interview today with someone that I interviewed previously on another podcast, and someone that is a notable member of American Jiu-Jitsu in particular. And I like to make that distinction because I think it's always cool to realize that, hey, man, there's some pretty good jiu-jitsu that comes from homegrown USA just as well. I have Justin, the Punisher Raider, here with me, two-time IBJJF no-gi world champion, black belt, ADCC bronze medalist. And if it wasn't for Ruben Charles and Rafa Mendez, we might be speaking a whole lot more of his name, because it seems like those are the only two guys that have beat you over the last 5, 6 years, 10 years of competition. So, Justin, thank you very much for coming on the show. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. How you doing?
You know, man, I'm doing all right, man. You know, I've actually this whole sequestering thing kind of comes in waves and ebbs and flows, and I'm getting through it, man. And anything I can do to get out there and start hustling, I'm enjoying these interviews. I'm enjoying talking to people, and I'm enjoying my writing. It's been giving me an opportunity to really kind of like find a new avenue to keep my love for jiu-jitsu flowing in different artistic manners. So, you know,
yeah,
here we go, man.
Especially during these strange and uncertain times.
That's a very good way to put it, brother. Very good way to put it. So you are in Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma, isn't that where you're at? Yeah.
Yeah. I just opened up my academy almost, like it's already been 2 years, almost 2 years ago to the day, called Legacy Martial Arts. And we're located out here in Edmond, Oklahoma.
Awesome. Cool, man. So let's get into it, man. Let's talk a little bit about you in particular. You know, I'd like to talk about, you know, your competitions from an early days, just the whole background, where you started from, how you got into jiu-jitsu, and the whole story. Let's just go to it. Tell me the Justin Raider story, man.
Yeah, from the very beginning, you know, I got started in martial arts at a very young age. My father's the one that got me started at age 4. And the very first thing ever I started with was Taekwondo. I trained at a place out here in Edmond, Oklahoma called Poo's Taekwondo. That's where I got started. And then probably 4 or 5 months later or so, I started wrestling. And so my father, he, traveled, probably within a good, hour or so radius and researched and looked at, all the like top, credible instructors and teachers that he could find, and researched every place, the Taekwondo place, that I was training out of at that time. Like, I mean, they had, guys like, like almost Olympic caliber, competing constantly and teaching and that kind of thing. And so that place actually happened to be like right around the corner from my house, so that was really easy. But then my wrestling team, that was like 35 minutes, across town, because we lived in Oklahoma City, and then Edmond is, right next to it. And, Edmond's, pretty big as well. So where we lived in Oklahoma City, it was about, 35 minute drive, out to where I would wrestle. And so I wrestled for the team name at that time was called the Edmond Bulldogs. And of course, my dad, he went through researched a lot of the like the local little league wrestling teams. And this one was run by, this little league program was run by a man named Kevin Hendricks, who was Johnny Hendricks' father.
Oh, and cool, man. That's awesome.
None of us knew that at the time. We knew Kevin Hendricks was a Division I national champion. Right. And they had,
and no one knew who Johnny Hendricks was going to be at that time either. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no one knew who he was going to be either. He was, I think, like somewhere between 3 and 4 years older than I was, right, on the team. And so that's that was where my wrestling roots, began, and it was there in Edmond, Oklahoma. And so, I mean, I had plenty of days like Taekwondo would happen at a certain time, and they had like an earlier class, in the afternoons. So like back in the days when you could walk home from like first grade and stuff like that, that's what I did. I was in first grade. I'd walk I don't know, probably somewhere between a quarter, a half mile all the way home. And I'd have 20 or 30 minutes. Then I'd, get changed, go to Taekwondo practice. And I would, get done with Taekwondo, and, there wasn't time. I had to rush right out to the car because we had to drive 35 minutes across town. And so I would change in the car into my wrestling gear, then boom, go to wrestling practice during wrestling season. And then when wrestling season would end, I only practiced, Taekwondo at that point in time. But that's where I started. And I did that all through elementary school. I also dabbled a little bit in Kyokushin karate. So I hold a junior black belt, or what they call like a red black belt in Taekwondo under the system that I was training in. And then I earned a brown belt in Kyokushin karate. And I continued to wrestle all the way through middle school and high school. And then I started training jiu-jitsu when I was 12. So
you trained jiu-jitsu. Was that Brazilian jiu-jitsu? You trained Brazilian jiu-jitsu at a young age too, huh?
Yeah. So at 12 years old, so like I was at one of the wrestling team practices, and like everyone there kind of knew that, like, especially my father, that we were in all that kind of martial arts stuff, and they drove by a place that said jiu-jitsu, and they were like, hey, they didn't know anything about it. They happened to mention it, and so we went and checked it out, and I started training jiu-jitsu at that point in time.
What year was that around about? 2000, 2002, somewhere around there? 2005, maybe? 1998?
Yeah.
Wow.
I started before 2000.
That's in particular, I find that intriguing in and of itself, because not only are you kind of break down two different barriers, because I know that jiu-jitsu at that time wasn't really the same jiu-jitsu that we're learning now, in terms of there was more striking, there was more like more brutality to it. So when I talk to a lot of old guys that have been around jiu-jitsu from that young of an age, most of them are from that early of an age of the age of jiu-jitsu. Most of them are a little bit older. Most of them are guys that have been traditional martial arts for a while, that were kind of drawn to this jiu-jitsu thing. You don't see a whole lot of young kids that started at that young of an age when they're very impressionable at that point in time. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah. Like when I tested for my blue belt, like I had to fight mixed martial arts.
Yeah,
that was part of the whole curriculum. Like if you couldn't fight, then it was just like, and I mean, I wasn't the great, especially with my hands. Like I'm not, and I know where I stand. Like I'm not the greatest striker ever, whatnot. But like like a blue belt, like I mean, you could handle yours. I mean, I remember when there was only like, my God, like you could count like the number of black belts, in North America like hand, and even blue belts. Like back then, we looked at blue belt. Blue belts were like demigods.
Yeah, a purple belt was a god that walked. If you saw a purple belt, right? Yeah, if you saw a purple belt, it was.
Yeah, and nowadays, like, man, there's like thousands and thousands of blue belts. There's even hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of black belts.
God,
now.
There's probably close to 1,000. God, I mean, I see them all the time anymore. There's probably more close to thousands of black belts in the U.S. now. Right.
Yep, I would agree as well. So yeah, I started that when I was 12, and when I started training jiu-jitsu, I kind of dropped Taekwondo and karate, and I just kind of kept the grappling art. So during wrestling season, I wasn't actually training jiu-jitsu, like because I started wrestling for my middle school team. And so like when we got to middle school, we all kind of went like our separate ways per whatever district we were in. So like Johnny Hendricks, he went on to go wrestle for Edmond Memorial. Some of the other guys, went on to wrestle at like Edmond North. And then I ended up at Deer Creek, which is also a school in Edmond, and much smaller than the bigger Edmond, North Edmond Memorial high schools and middle schools as well. So like at that point in time, like I started wrestling for my team, and it was a much, larger commitment. And my wrestling coach, Andy Howington, like, I mean, we would have practice after school for, 2 or 3 hours. And then, like, of course, homework load gets bigger and whatnot. So when I was wrestling, I wasn't actually training jiu-jitsu. So I was training jiu-jitsu probably about 7 months out of the year. And I was wrestling, during wrestling season about 5 months out of the year. But I was like nonstop grappling, from ages, 12 all the way through high school. And then at high school, I for a lot of different reasons, I decided not to continue to pursue wrestling, and I stopped wrestling. I considered walking on to OU, which is where I was going to college, but I basically talked myself out of it, and I just stuck with jiu-jitsu. I for a lot of different reasons, like I never won a state title, in wrestling. I got second my senior year. I was a runner-up in high school, and I had already gotten second place at the Pan Ams as a blue belt, which I kind of like in my head, like equated to like a bigger title. So I was like, well, maybe I have a better shot, in pursuing jiu-jitsu than I do in wrestling anyway, especially like, at the D1 program that is new. Like I didn't feel like I would, have what it, takes or whatnot. And I wish that I had given myself that, opportunity and experience, because I look back on it now and I use it as a teaching tool to teach all of my students, like, I only wrestled because I only didn't wrestle because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe I had what it took to be a D1 All-American, just because I never won a state wrestling title, in high school or whatnot. And like guys that I, was neck and neck with in high school went on to become Division I All-Americans. I was just like, man, like,
Oklahoma in particular that's a wrestling state. You finished second in the state in Oklahoma. That's a state championship in, 75-80% of other states.
100%, so I look back on it and it's just like, like if I really look hardcore in the mirror and I'm just like very truthful and open and honest with myself. And I tell, especially my kids students this all the time, like, if I had been humble enough to be vulnerable and actually talk to like even my wrestling coach about this, I guarantee you he would have, talked me into believing in myself and giving myself that shot. But I felt embarrassed that that's what I was feeling about myself. So I never had the conversation.
Wrestling too, in particular, is one of those collegiate athletics where, you can wrestle with Division I athletes and even possibly make a spot on the team. Sure. Just like coming up to show to practice. Like you're allowed to just, hey, look, man, I want to wrestle. Now, obviously, you have to continue on with their ethos and all the other things. But I know quite a few people that were walk-ons that ended up making a spot on the team because, hey, they happen to be the best guy at that weight class. You're in the room training with Division I guys.
Yep, absolutely. So I decided not to do that. So I just stuck with jiu-jitsu at that point in time. And I trained hardcore jiu-jitsu for probably like, the next 10 years or so. And then I started fighting professionally. I think in was that 2014? I think at the beginning of 2014, I started fighting professionally, and I did that.
MMA or jiu-jitsu? That was MMA or that was jiu-jitsu?
Oh, yeah, mixed martial arts.
Mixed martial arts, right?
I worked my way up. The height of my mixed martial arts career, I fought for the Legacy Fighting Alliance, featherweight world title, and I lost a 5-round decision to Kevin Aguilar, and then it was like, like. Time to get the end game in line, and so I'm more or less pretty much retired from that, and I decided to open up my academy here called Legacy Martial Arts in Edmond, Oklahoma. So that's kind of a little bit about my history.
That's cool, man. Like I had no idea that whenever I talk to someone that trained jiu-jitsu, in the 90s is one thing, but like before 2005, 2006, I always think of that kind of like 2004, 2005 area, like pre-UFC explosion jiu-jitsu,
right.
Whereupon like, we're still in the days of jiu-jitsu as hard. I mean, it wasn't really a welcoming, hey, come to my gym, we're going to have an intro program, I'll hold your hand and lead you through. No, a lot of the times in particular, a lot of guys that went to BJJ specifically with other martial arts backgrounds that were already got black belts, other martial arts backgrounds that were like, hey, man, I'm going to come try this thing, but I'm only doing it just so I can help and improve upon the arts that I don't really believe in it. Of course not, but I want to show to you that, hey, this still works. So it turned kind of brutal, guys actually.
Yeah. Well, and like when I started training jiu-jitsu too, like there wasn't really a kids program. And man, you want to talk about like kids competitions, like there weren't kids competitions. Like I'd go to these competitions, like I'd go to Carlos Machado's tournaments, and there'd be like maybe one or two other kids in the entire gymnasium that like even had gis or whatnot. So I pretty much primarily started competing as an adult at age 13.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. That's crazy. So let me ask you a few more specific questions. I got a few things I jotted down listening to that, and one of the things is why do you think that club wrestling and the sport of wrestling is as big in the Midwest as what it is? What do you think draws you guys to that?
I have no idea, honestly. I've actually wondered that for a long time myself. Like, we do from here in Oklahoma, like we have our own Olympic champion in John Smith, who is also the head coach of Oklahoma State.
Arguably one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, one of the greatest American wrestlers of all time.
Like with one of the most, amazing and incredible low-level singles. But I mean, he used to wrestle for Dell City out here in Oklahoma, which is probably about 30 minutes south or 35 minutes south or so from where I'm at right now. So like maybe that's part of it. I don't know what draws us, all to wrestling, here, especially in the state of Oklahoma or even in the Midwest. I don't really know. It's certainly not as big in Texas. Like football seems to be really big in Texas. And so what or why those things are, I don't even really have any of my own theories, honestly, either.
It's I just think about that, and maybe I should actually research it and Google instead of coming in and do my own research. And screw you, man, you can find out yourself. But I'm just curious. I was wondering if you had any kind of insights under that.
Yeah, no, I mean there are places in the Northeast too, like New Jersey has some amazing.
Pennsylvania, the big wrestlers at Penn State, and all that stuff.
Now you got Cale Sanderson as their head coach. Like, dude.
A lot of people say it has something to do with the fact that the wintertime, it's the same thing. The reason why basketball is as big out there in some of the Midwestern, like Indiana and places like that, because it's so cold and horrible. The winters are so bad. You can't do outdoor sports. So the only thing you can do is if that's what's in the inside. I think there's more to it to that, but just interesting side notes.
Absolutely.
So what do you think? So as one of the big questions that I get asked a lot, particularly when I'm involved with parents that have children that wrestle, is they ask me this question a lot. They ask me, will BJJ hinder or improve my son's wrestling as they start to train? What do you think about that?
Man, I get asked that a lot as well. And I think I have some really good insight because I started both so very young. I started wrestling when I was 4. I started jiu-jitsu when I was 12. I did both of those, side by side in tandem from the ages 12 to almost 19. So in my eyes, in my opinion, like it won't hurt at all. In fact, I think the younger you get started in both, the better. I think it's easier, to transition from both the more times that you do it. So I don't think that it hurts at all. I think it, only can help. I will say this though, what it does is like, first of all, no one likes losing and no one likes feeling like they're not making any progress, and, no one likes, being frustrated or whatnot. So what happens when you start a sport? There is there's a learning curve, and let's say it's this big or whatnot, and then you finally start to have success, over here. And as you go on and on and on, more and more success or whatnot, and then you try to implement and bring something else in, especially, probably in your first 5, 6, 7 years. Like if we think, I like to call them the grappling arts, jiu-jitsu is a grappling art, wrestling is a grappling art. So things that, kind of fall within the grappling arts or whatnot, if you try to implement a new grappling art in a new system with new rules, there's going to be, again, a learning curve. So like, let's say you start jiu-jitsu and wrestling at the same time. Let's say the learning curve, I'm trying to like line myself up with the camera. Let's say the learning curve, right? Let's say this is the learning curve. Okay. But let's say if you start both, let's say it just extends the learning curve a little bit longer. So if you just stick with it and stick it out, like, I think that you gain something like, far greater than, you would have than if you didn't have it. I like to call like the wrestling that I used and that I used for, 10 years on the professional grappling scene against some of the best grappling athletes, jiu-jitsu athletes in the world. The wrestling I used was an X factor. It gave me an edge in a lot of ways over a lot of really, really good guys. But don't think for a moment that I didn't pay the price time and again at the lower belt rank levels. There were times that, I would shoot in and get guillotined. There were times that I would shoot in and get anaconda. There were times I would shoot in and, not get my points and get triangled. I had to make all of those mistakes. And on some level, like, even as great as your teacher may or may not be, you won't you having your own experiences, you will learn more from in the end anyway. So it just takes time. I would say, honestly, it took me probably a good 7-8 years before I really felt like I could seamlessly and comfortably use my wrestling in line with my overall jiu-jitsu game and strategy, you know. And what happened, you know, once I got to that point, what happened was this, like, you know, let's you know, Kevin, you know what, we'll run a social experiment. I'm going to ask you real quick. I'm going to ask you a question. What position is your favorite position in jiu-jitsu? What position is your favorite?
We'll say I'll say mount, just for sake of argument.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Okay. So your favorite position is mount. My favorite position actually happens to be starting on the feet. Okay. So if every match you got to start in mount, Kevin, do you think your winning percentage would increase?
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%, you know?
Right.
So for me, like unfortunately, matches don't start in mount. Like, you're not going to get to just go to a tournament and start in mount or whatnot. But every match does start on the feet. That just happens to be my best position. So all these other great jiu-jitsu artists out there or whatnot, like, they had to start in my best position. And I knew that going in, and I built an entire game and strategy around having that weapon, you know? Like, a lot of guys train, like, you know, way back in the day, remember, like, you know, people would, you know, and maybe places still do it. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with it. I just think it needs to be held in its proper place and perspective. And I think you need to train yourself to train different ways and have different mindsets when training and whatnot. But, like, remember starting on the knees?
Yep.
Yeah, you know, it still happens all the time or whatnot. What happens with that kind of like training mindset or whatnot, you know? Well, you always think of it as 0-0, that you're not losing, and you're playing guard and you're not losing. Well, these guys would get into a match with me, and all of a sudden they would find themselves playing guard, playing whatever their best position, but now they're losing by 2 points. So eventually, as the time starts to go down, will click, like, oh my gosh, I'm losing by 2 points. They had to open up more. When they would open up more, it opened, like everything in jiu-jitsu is give and take. Like, they're trying to, you know, they have to open up more. They're trying to take this, you know, to get something out of it from me, which means I have a chance to take something from them as well. And that opened up all the passing game and everything, and the way that I just, you know, employed the strategy.
Bernardo Fario used that analogy a lot when he talked about it. They would talk about I remember hearing an interview about it from him, and he said that he'd get criticized for not being a finisher, not finishing as many people as much, and being kind of a points guy. And he would say this, he'd say, look, man, like, the more points I scored, the more opportunities I would get for submissions, because now the idea of this person is down by 5 points, 6 points, they start to realize I have to open up my game and take more chances because I'm behind, which allows me to have more opportunities to score those submissions.
And I absolutely agree with him 100%. Couldn't be said any better. And that was really more or less the same strategy I employed, you know, myself as well, you know? And then, so for me, it was just like it was the edge and advantage that I had over everyone, like my very best position. And I did it, you know, a number of times, you know, against like really, really good guys. I beat them because I got that first takedown. And what did that do? That built a sort of, like, you know how we tell people, like, don't fight names, you know, or like I love the scene from Gladiator where Juba told Maximus, you have a great name. He has to kill your name before he kills you. Otherwise, he would make him a martyr, you know? Same thing here, whatnot. People bought into so much, like, you know, oh my God, if you stand and, you know, play takedowns with Justin Rader, you're likely to lose because I made that happen against a couple of very big name guys. And all of a sudden, people wouldn't even challenge me on the feet anymore, you know? And at the end of the day, like, it is my best position or whatnot. But like, I think, you know, if people had maybe challenged me a little bit more, like, you know, that maybe they, you know, or worked to improve, you know, the rest. It's one of the things that I talked very, you know, very, very briefly at some of the ADCCs with Cobrinha about was, you know, like I told him by, I think, gosh, what, the third ADCC, like, you know, I told him, I was like, man, I can tell, like, you have really, really, you know, been working on your wrestling, and it has improved a lot, you know, because my first couple of matches with him, I really feel like, you know, he was able to, you know, do what he needed to do, get his guard pull, get his game going or whatnot. But like, I really felt in those matches like I was the superior wrestler. And by my third or fourth match with him, I could tell that there had been a significant change. And he told me, he was like, yeah, you know, like, I have been working on, you know, and trying to improve my wrestling a lot, especially for the ADCC competitions, which, you know, the way their rule set does, you know, and I believe rightfully so. And when you consider, you know, an overall aspect of our sport for, you know, good evolutionary progress of, jiu-jitsu fighters, it does favor wrestlers, which I think is a good thing or whatnot.
I think the ADCC is unquestionably the best rule set in forms of deciding who the best grappler is, and I'll hold true to that. I think points are very hard. It's very hard to score in ADCC. Standing is essential, and again, if you're talking about things that really represent what a true life altercation is going to be like without throwing punches, ADCC is without question, I think, the closest one to that.
I do think it's definitely one of the better ones, and I do agree. I think it's honestly probably the closest one out there as well, So, but yeah, Cobrinha told me that he had been working, and drilling and trying to improve his wrestling a lot, over the evolution. Gosh, let's see, like five years, from my first match with him to my third and fourth final matches with him. Like there had been significant improvement, and when you saw that improvement, that was when you saw him finally beat Rafael Mendez in the ADCC finals, because he had lost 2 previous times, brackets, all of which that and
yeah, right.
Both of those guys always in the semifinals. Always.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to win when you have arguably 2 of the greatest grapplers of all time. Yeah, in your division. So
I had five matches with Hoffa, 4 with Cobrinha, 0 and 9 total records. So those guys had my number for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about some things here, because I'm curious about them. When we talk about what makes truly great grapplers great, and like you've been in there with some of the greatest in the world, and one of the things we talked about was, and I think is what's good about what's happening in modern jiu-jitsu, is the fact that guys are starting to realize that you have to have a complete game. You have to actively find your weaknesses and figure out a way to get better at them. And if you're not doing that, you're lying to yourself. Tell me a little bit about what you feel like makes Rafa Mendez and Cobrinha so good, because a lot of time we could just say, oh, well, they're so technical, they're just great, they have this, they have that, because I personally don't believe that there's too much that separates you and Rafa or Cobrinha on a technical side. You guys all know the same jiu-jitsu, you guys are all competing at that great stage, but there's some X factors involved that might be the difference maker. What do you think about that?
I think honestly, and I don't think people put enough emphasis on it as well. I really do think it starts in the mind, and I really think that your mindset going out there, how well you believe in yourself and your techniques, how calm, you can keep yourself, well. Is your heart rate just boom, 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 or is it very calm, very peaceful, when you can finally hold everything in its, proper and correct perspective, I think it's a lot easier to go out there and execute. And, when you watch guys like, Rafa Mendez and Cobrinha and even some of the greater, guys that are really high up or whatnot, I think we can get caught up in, oh my gosh, they know these techniques, or they know this or that, and I actually think that's less of what's happening there or whatnot. Don't get me wrong, it certainly plays a part, but I think their ability to execute is probably the biggest factor. And where does that come from? That comes from their mindset and their confidence that they have in themselves. And it just, takes you can only gain that by going through the trial by fire. Like I tell all my students all the time, I have lost just about every which way you could possibly imagine 2 or 3 times over. Like, have I had the bad calls? Yes. Have I had the good calls? Yes. Have have I gone against people who are just better than me that day? Yes. Have I competed sick? Yes. Have I lost, because like it was, like I just made a mistake? Yes. Did I try to fix those technical errors? Yes. There are things outside of your control, as well. Like, have I lost before because a referee said stop and I stopped and the other guy didn't stop? Yeah, I have. That cost me $7,000, like I learned that lesson the hard way. You go through like, and then different tournaments are, different too. Are you competing at, local Oklahoma City Open, where everyone's like, really nice and cool? Or are you out there with like, IBJJF World's Finals with real killers who won't think twice about breaking your arm in half as fast as they can if you don't tap?
Right.
Yeah, all of these things, play factors. But like when you look at those guys and you just see, and they're able to do it, almost exactly the same every single time, that speaks of execution, and their execution comes from their mindset and belief that they have in themselves. They just, it never crosses their mind, and when I used to compete too, it would never cross my mind that like I was doing something that wasn't going to work, Now you get in there and, you get halfway through something or whatnot, yes, of course you have to have good scrambling, adaptive, innovative, abilities, in matches or whatnot. Things are not going to always look as pretty, but can the execution at the end of the day get the job done? Yes. Like I also tell people all the time, you see it all the time, you ask 10 different black belts the same question, and you're going to get 10 different variations of answers based on a lot of different things: athleticism, body type, height, weight, length. All these things play a factor, and so you're going to get little. Are any of them wrong? No. If you were to say, I don't even, when I teach.
Uh-oh.
I'm still there. There we go. It might work.
Yeah, we'll fix it. I can edit that out. Go ahead.
Okay, no worries. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I look at this guy and does it work for him? And that's the kind of the question that I ask myself. Does it work for that person, or does it work for this person? So like I said, you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different, variant answers. And I try not to use, right and wrong when I teach. If and so here's the way that I will word it. If you could have all the belief in the world in a wrong technique, and it can still work just because you believed it was supposed to work, and it never crossed your mind that it wouldn't work. I've set this move up perfectly. I've got him right in my firing range, right where I need him. Boom, I explode. I don't hesitate. 100% firm belief, and wrong techniques can still work. We see it all the time.
It happens. It really is true, because you can watch. It's funny you say that, because as black belts, we can watch Cobarina or yourself or someone at a high level like do an armbar and do it 100% wrong, and thinking to myself like, that is so not the way to do it. But because it worked, and because it was Cobarina that was doing it, now I can look at that and say, wow, he's a genius. How amazing he was. He was be able to go through and change his techniques and apply that.
And what does that speak of or whatnot? That speaks of those individuals and our confidence in them, and how they give us confidence back. When you think about an instructor, like if you're training somewhere and you have and you're trying to learn from someone and you have zero confidence or belief in your instructor, whatnot, then on some level, you're not going to believe in your own techniques, and therefore I truly believe you'll have a very hard time reaching very elite levels. It's not impossible, I get it. Don't get me wrong. You can, go it your own way, and that might, like let's look at the chances and percentages, of everything or whatnot. What are your? I'm not saying it's impossible, and can it be done? And are there individuals? Yeah, I can tell you this guy here and that guy there, but two people, that doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, make a trend. Now, if someone is constantly like Andre Galvao is constantly and consistently, producing some of the, very best at whatever he's doing in his system, well, then that obviously is working for a, more general mass population. And therefore, there are things that he is doing that are correct.
Yeah, I see a lot of great competitors, and I watch a lot of great competitors, and I think in general, not just in jiu-jitsu, I think about this on all levels. And I think the defining characteristic that is always in my mind, because again, for jiu-jitsu or one-to-one combat or one-on-one combat is a very easy way to describe this. I have a game plan and you have a game plan. And at the highest level, technique doesn't really make a difference. It's not really the same. Obviously, if one's more prepared, but you're automatically assume that both guys do what they had to do to be ready to compete there. Like, I have my game plan and you have your game plan. The person that's able to implement their game plan is going to win that match. So in other words, if I'm able to take my game plan and apply it, therefore you are no longer thinking about your game plan and you're thinking about my game plan. So you're not able to execute that. And I think that comes down to a bunch of different factors. I think that primarily, though, if you can encompass it in one grand word, I think it comes down to character. And I think when I talk about character, I talk about a few of the things you said previously when you talked about being accountable. Because everyone's had, I mean, I've competed a lot too. I've had bad calls. I've had shit go fucking, I've had advantages go somebody else's way and lost and been like, what the fuck? This is so stupid. Like, I'm never doing this shit. You know what I'm talking about? This is ridiculous. This is stupid. I've gotten bad calls. I've done stupid things. But the idea that I always talk about this when I think about what separates the great ones from the mediocre is the fact that instead of saying, well, I lost because that referee made a bad call, or I lost because I slipped, or I lost because XYZ, I wasn't prepared. It's always someone else's fault. The real champions say, you know what? I accept responsibility. I accept accountability for what I did. And I say that I have to make sure I don't do it again to get better because of that. And I think that's what makes the greats greats. Everybody has fuck ups. Everybody has little issues where they make a mistake, And
it's funny you say that too. Like you're talking about decisions or whatnot. Like every IBJJF decision that I ever had did not go my way except for two. And they both happen to be the Nogi Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt World Finals. So,
well, if your name ain't De La Siva Santos, Bubba, it's going to be hard to get that call. I didn't say that out loud, but it's just the facts.
Right? 100%. 100%.
Go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
When I think about those calls and I think about those opportunities, I think about great athletes when they're caught in the moment. Because inevitably something happens. You're in a match, like something happens. You fuck up. Even the great ones make mistakes, especially when they're going against another great competitor. There's going to be opportunities where they are pushed to the limits, where they are thinking to themselves, okay, shit, I screwed up. I am behind. I am losing the advantageous, the higher ground, whatever you want to talk about. My game plan is starting to falling apart. And it's in those moments where the character starts to show through, because you can choose to say, shit, man, this happened. It wasn't my fault. I'm screwed now. Therefore, I am accepting defeat because it's not my fault anymore. But the truly great ones accept the idea of saying, you know what? This and this happened. It's still upon me to go out and finish this match and go out and win upon that. And like the truly great ones do that all the time, consistently, over and over and over again. It's because they have that character. They have that accountability themselves. Yeah,
I was in a match with Celcinho at the Ultimate Absolute 2, the lightweight division, 155 and under, and he was driving me in a double leg out of bounds. We're on top of the hotel room seats, and the referee was standing behind me that he was getting pushed into. I said, stop, and so I stopped, and he picked me up and slammed. You could watch it on YouTube. It's hilarious.
right.
I'm sitting there on the ground pointing at this ref, telling the ref to make it right. And there's the rest of that story is interesting. But for me, it was just like, you know what? I'll never like if the other guy doesn't stop fighting, I'll never stop fighting again. You know? So like a year and a half later, I'm in the ADCC consolation finals round with Joao Miao, and we're scrambling, we go out of bounds, and they finally say stop. Well, Joao didn't stop. So I didn't stop, right. I just scrambled around. Then my back is finally up against like this, like glass wall barrier in Beijing, and I'm like beginning to like start to wall walk up, because like you never know how even just because like you've seen it so many times at ADCC too, like
it's ridiculous.
Stop, like
someone's gonna die in an ADCC match, and they're gonna just let him pound drive his head into the concrete.
Yeah, so like we're on this hard like court. I can't remember exactly what kind of ground it was. We're on the hard ground, and I'm like, my back's you just never. So as long as he didn't stop fighting, I wasn't going to stop fighting until the ref finally, like, you know, very loudly, you know, yelled at us both to stop and come back to the center. And, you know, they started us in a pretty, you know, fair position.
You never know. You never. That's one of the gripes, particularly this last year was nuts. This last one was crazy. I saw so many things like, Jesus, like, come on, guys. Like, and it was weird because it wasn't really I can understand a continuation from a submission. You know, if you're in a submission, or even I will say maybe even a continuation from a double leg if it looks like the double leg is getting finished. But again, ADCC rules are so much different. You know what I mean? You got to hold the guy. You got to plant the guy on the ground and hold him there before you get.
I know. You know, like, to give the ADCC credit, like, they make it very well known to you, like, don't stop fighting.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Oh yeah, and believe
like,
me,
this is how it's going down. You're going to be fighting on the hardwood, like
they tell you that, right?
Like, you know, or don't come back to ADCC.
But I feel like they take it a bit too far. I think if you're fighting for a submission, you keep going until it's to the point where it's like, hey, bro, come on, we can't do anything else here. This is
right,
you know. Right. But if you're in a position where it's you're scrambling for a double leg to get back up, you know, and there's a back. Come on, man. Like, if they were on the mat, he's probably not going to finish it either. He's only going to stop because he's on the concrete.
Yeah, well, like from an athlete safety perspective too, you could, you know, make like an argument or whatnot, and it's just like, why even have a mat with out of bounds then, you know? But like, you know, like I said, at least
the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but like, at least ADCC kind of like, you know, they make it known up front, like, you know, hey, this is what you're getting into.
I still think, again, I'll defend it 100%. I still think the ADCC rule format, there's a lot of fun grappling. I enjoy submission only. I enjoy watching. I enjoy competing in it. But there's still ways to game that system in the same way there's ways. I think the ADCC rules format is the closest to what we're ever going to get to who truly the greatest grappler in the world is. And I think it's the best format.
The biggest change they could make would be to give the points for turtle. So like, if I take you down and you turtle, I still – that I to be honest, I think that too. A lot of their, like, you know, matches that go to ties. I think that would solve a lot of their problems.
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you're talking from I have made my name in ADCC matches by playing that game. So like, my turtle game is on point. but I 100% agree with you that, like, in my mindset, that should be a takedown. I get the idea. It makes for exciting matches. It makes for more excitement, but guys definitely play that rule. If you take somebody down and they go to turtle, that should be a takedown. There should be no question about that at all. You shouldn't have to hold them on their hips on the ground. It makes these matches go on forever and ever. Nobody wants to see a tie, no matter how exciting it is.
Right, 100%.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's piggyback off that a little bit, because I would like to get your perspective on some of the modern professional jiu-jitsu circuit and some of your thoughts on how you feel like that goes. And maybe we'll get into the obscenely ego-driven competitors of late, but I won't get too involved in that. I there's a part of me that understands that is part of building, even though it goes against some of my ideas of what martial arts is all about. But let's talk about how you feel about professional MMA in general. How do you feel like that is helping, hindering? Do you feel like it's a good thing? You know, anyway.
Professional MMA or
professional jiu-jitsu, professional grappling. I'm sorry, not MMA.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah. To be really honest, I'm not for it, and I have some theories as to maybe why it took that route. I wish it had taken what I see as a different route or whatnot, but like, I don't believe, like, when we think about it, you know, first of all, like, what was jiu-jitsu created for? It was an art that was created, you know, for a person who might be of smaller statures, you know, not as athletic, not as strong, not as big, through a superior set of knowledge and skill to be able to use leverage and technique to overtake, keep themselves safe, and hopefully potentially finish, you know, a larger, stronger, more athletic opponent, you know, from a combat standpoint. So when we think of self-defense, that's what we call like max level combat. Like, death is really an outcome that has a far greater chance of happening. So everything that we do, like if we train to death, that's bad. Many people die then, and you don't have the evolution that you would like to have. Plus, you can't train yourself necessarily to get to a certain standpoint as safely either, especially if you die early. So we don't train. We train at a submax level, and so the first submax level would be mixed martial arts, where you're in there, throwing, grappling, striking, takedowns, all that kind of stuff. So that's submax. Professional grappling, now we're limiting it to one more or less main basic aspect, and in grappling, kind of two, because we kind of we start on the feet, we have the takedowns and whatnot. So grappling is submax. So it's submax, to the second power, if you will, because we're not throwing any punches, strikes, or kicking, which definitely change the game. Nevertheless, I do think that it should be in some way, shape, or form accounted for, and you should be held accountable within your grappling sport, if you will. We should be held accountable. So what takes place of the damage of punches? Points, and again, we have to look at everything under a bell curve level scale. Don't bring me well, this guy, one guy over here, or like Ryan Hall's doing it in the UFC or whatnot. Ryan Hall is a far more skilled opponent on the ground than anybody else in the UFC, and therefore he's really more of an outlier in a lot of ways. If guys were just as good, or maybe potentially better grapplers, at the specific game that he's playing, they would, have to they would cause him to change and open up. And so those are very real things that we have to account for. So when making the rules of a sport, you have to look at the general population bell curve and who falls under that, and there are certain assumptions that you have to make when making a rule set. You can't assume that you are already necessarily that much better, from your opponent, that, oh yeah, I can lay on my back, blah, 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 and I wouldn't take any damage because I'm already that much more skilled. You can't make that assumption. That would be arrogant, and therefore the wrong mindset to enter into any sort of altercation from a self-defense aspect or standpoint, where death is a real option on the table as to the outcome of how it might happen. So especially in hand-to-hand combat. So you have to take those things into account. So you can't assume automatically that you are better. And if you are not better, it's safe to assume on some level, if you are on the ground longer, that the person on top will be able to apply more damage than the person on bottom. Therefore, in my opinion, the only system that works, that through what this was, in my eyes and perspective, to be created for, the only system that works is a points-only system where you don't have any advantages. All advantages do was apply a safety net, to do things halfway and feel like you've got some sort of reward or score for them. It was designed, I think, with the theory and intention to promote people to go for more submissions or whatnot, to try to increase the number of chances or whatnot, to make their finishing percentages higher. But all it did was give me a safety net to fall back on. So if I don't get that triangle, I know I'm still winning. Now you can't pass my guard. You can't, whatever. You can't force another advantage, and I can just kind of hang out on bottom. If you just hang out on bottom in an actual fight against someone of pretty equal and or even a little bit better skill, it's safe to assume and say that you would probably be taking some sort of damage in the form of punches or elbows while you're laying on your back, and you see it all the time.
I'll take that one step further, and I always use this analogy too, because I agree with you and disagree with you. I still think that even sport jiu-jitsu athletes have a superpower in a street fight. I mean, in a real life altercation. I think anyone that goes out, I'll even say that the fact that you go out there and you're competing on a super high level against another person at a super high level, like, your ideas of what you're going to do in a real life altercation, that funnel's going to low down. Nobody's going to pull on their butt and scoot around. However, you are not training in the means that jiu-jitsu was designed to be focused on. And I'll say in this to kind of back that up a little bit. When you talk about the idea of leg locks, you talk about the idea of laying the ground and guard, like, I'll even say this, like, positional jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, is far more dominant than an actual submission when you're talking about controlling an aggressor. All right. Because Like when you're in a street fight, and again, there is nothing in the world like a real life fight. MMA ain't the same. I don't care what to say. It duplicates it. It works on it in what you said in a, I forget the terminology you use, but in a tiered type position, you know, jiu-jitsu. Yeah, exactly. Jiu-jitsu the same way, or jiu-jitsu match the same way. Nothing is the same as what a real life altercation is like. You have adrenaline flowing. You have someone that is in their mind looking to kill you. And then for that 35 seconds or so, they are going to be superhuman because they get an adrenaline dump that blows through them. What's the number one thing in jiu-jitsu we always teach? To contain, control, and allow people to blow that wad into where now they are left helpless. So in that regard, if I kick down on my butt, I roll through, I heel hook somebody, that guy still has a shit ton of adrenaline coming in. That's a tough dude. You know what you got? You got a really tough dude that still wants to kill you with a broken leg. Now, tomorrow, he's not going to be able to walk, but right now, he's still got 2 good arms to try to beat you and 1 good leg to kick you with. You know? So, in that regard, I believe and I understand, and that's the same reason why I say I believe the ADCC is the greatest rule set, because you have to pin people on the ground. You have to control them. You have to make sure you maintain. There's no such thing as the bullshit of like, okay, weevil around. No, I pin this guy on the ground. I'm controlling him there. That's how I got my points.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, and again, too, like when you say superpower, whatnot, I do agree with you. However, from like a martial arts ethos standpoint, like we can't assume that going in.
Right. No, never.
Right, exactly. And then from like, you know, now creating it for a sport, like now we're taking trained individuals against trained individuals or whatnot, you know? So like the level of, you know, like it's no longer, a gap necessarily like this, that level is definitely closed down. So when you think about making the rules, we have to make these same basic assumptions. And, so like, okay, I can't assume they're better. So the fact is like, I might be taking damage. So like, there are definitely things that I would, there are a lot of things I would change about the rules, but I do believe a points only system without advantages is the absolute very best rule set that is out there. That's why the ADCC is the closest thing. The only thing I don't like about the ADCC is they ruin the integrity of their match when they change the rules halfway through a match. Yeah. It's almost like that perfect blend of sub only, which I am just completely so against, versus a points only system. And they're trying. Let
me ask you a question real quick. And so I understand your philosophy on the idea of being against sub only, because and as of me, I am searching for something that will help bring the sport to the mainstream, simply because I do believe that jiu-jitsu is exciting enough to be, it might not ever be, the NFL. It might not ever be something big, but I can 100% see it becoming something that'll show up on ESPN late night, something that us as fans could be able to get behind and say, oh, wow, cool, man. My guys that I know that train their asses off can figure out a way to make a living as a professional jiu-jitsu athlete. Right. But the problem is we can't ever find a rule set that follows that template. And I don't believe that submission only is really the right way to do that. I think it, as much as people want to say, oh, it's exciting, it's not, man. I watch a lot of submission only matches, and like a 10-minute submission only match is sometimes like watching paint dry. I'm not going to lie to you. I wish it wasn't. There's outliers that change that, but it's really, and I know jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu.
Right? No, and I can't like if you're going to do sub only, I think there's only one format that actually works in, no time limit. And yes. I don't know about you, but I didn't watch all of 88 minutes of Gordon Ryan and Keenan Cornelius. Like I clicked through here and I I watched like 10 or 15 seconds.
I did, but I had a TV show on in the background. So
oh yeah, there you go. I clicked right to the end and it was like, okay, there's the heel hook. All right, let's go. So I always spent about maybe 7-8 minutes of myself like actually sitting down and watching. Like I went click, 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 click. Okay, there it is. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say like that there's not something to be said for like being able to fight for 88 minutes and against an athlete and competitor like that. And like there probably was a ton of great transitions, motors, whatever. I just didn't. I don't have it in me to sit down and watch all 80.
And neither does the rest of the world. Unfortunately, you don't have time. You can't have 5 88-minute matches. It's just not going to happen. But I agree with you. According to the old school guys, you know what I mean? Like, if you really want to find out who the greatest grappler is, that's the way you do it. You have no time limit. And
I personally think that kind of format is left better in the training room. It is not necessarily good or the format we want to use for our sport. So then we decided, to bring in, oh, well, we'll put a time limit on it, and then like Metamoris did the whole, like, if it goes to decision, both people win. Well, we figured out very quickly, no one wants to watch draws.
No.
So, okay, well, we'll have judges' decisions. Okay, so here's the problem with the judge's decision, all right? So, Kevin, name another, like, we'll go with the NFL, okay? Let's say for a moment, let's imagine you know zero about NFL and NFL rules. You know nothing, zero. But you're watching it with some of your buddies, and you're kind of getting introduced to it, And, like, you're sitting there and you kind of have an idea, you see them moving the ball here and moving the ball there. And like all of, you kind of watch your buddies and like, they're all cheering. And then, like 10 minutes later, they're all yelling, screaming and cursing. And then they're cheering again at the end. And then everyone's happy and the game's over. And you're like, well, what happened? And you look at the final score and you see, 28-27. My buddies were going for that team here. That team won. I understand why they're happy.
Right. Because the points are on the board.
Exactly. You watch these sub-only events and you don't know anything. You're watching it with your buddies, and they're all excited and they're hooping and hollering and they're screaming and cursing and then they're hooping and hollering again. And at the end, there's this suspenseful moment and then they raise and then everyone's cheering and whatnot. And you're like, okay, I see the flags and it says that guy won, but why did he win? That's your question. And so you ask me, the professional, and you're like, and I have to use phrases and words like this. Well, I think probably, maybe it might have been, maybe some of the judges were thinking, I'm using too many mights, maybes, probablys or whatnot. That is not for you. You're like, man, this is like one of the best guys in the world or whatever. And even he can't. The decisions I won, I have no idea why they gave me the win against Bruno Frazzato when I won the fight to win lightweight no-gi belt. Right. I have no idea why I won that. And I was out there. I was out there, Right. Like, no, I don't think many people know this. Like, they had a little bit of problem with him. Like, they felt like he was backing up a lot and using the edge of the stage. Right. And so like the head referee that was out there, told me in Frazzato, he told Frazzato, he said, yeah, I think there was like 4 minutes left. He told Frazzato, he was like, if there's I think there was about 4 minutes. He told Frazzato, he's like, if this goes to decision, I'm not voting for you.
Right. All I
got to do is convince one of these other two guys that I'm going to get the win. But beyond that, I don't know what it was like necessarily or specifically that I did. I don't know that my submissions were that I had more or anything like that. But again, then I go back to the same thing. I have no idea why I lost to Gianni Grippo. Right. I have no idea.
Yeah, I see the same thing. And I again, it is what it is. I enjoy, from the standpoint of I am a grappler, I enjoy watching submission only matches. I've competed in submission only. I've competed in points matches. I enjoy watching submission grappling, and I also enjoy competing in submission only grappling. But I think the major issue that I have is that guys that like to draw this distinction and say, well, submission only grappling is really the only true way. Well, did it go to a ref's decision? Well, yeah. Well, because you have a set criteria, correct, in order to judge for what happened in that match. Oh yeah, cool, yeah, okay. So what's the number one set criteria in fight to win? Submission attempts. Well, me and you already know that I don't give a shit how many submissions you throw up. How many did you finish? No, right, cool. Well, did you win? No, you didn't, because all I got to do is throw up one. It doesn't matter how many times you try to submit somebody. It matters because you could try to throw up 9 submissions on me and fail all of them. If I catch you in one armbar, I still won, because what did I do? I frustrated you thinking you could submit me, and now you fell into my hands and got lazy and kept going until I caught you in submission. So, right. And then there's other, like, anytime there's a criteria, there's going to be opportunities for competitors to game that system.
Sure.
It's a horrible debate. It makes me crazy when I see that. We're going to start wrapping it up just because we're getting we're getting on the hour here. But right. When I see that debate and I talk about all the different ways I feel like guys talk about, like, well, this format's better, this format's better. I think the grappling world is starting to come away from that. And I think we're starting to see the idea of being complete grapplers as the right way to do things, guys that are submission oriented and that are also thinking about they have to understand provisional things. I think we're seeing the more complete grapplers come out of that, and we're generating exciting grapplers because of that. But I still think the magic format for a breakthrough breakthrough sport or breakthrough jiu-jitsu, professional jiu-jitsu, has to have some points in it. I have to have a point-oriented match but there has to be rules that make people push the action. You can't just fucking take somebody down and hold on to their head.
That's my theory as to why it took this turn or whatnot. Like, you had the IBJJF before all this sub only, and everyone hated advantages and everyone hated decisions. And all they needed to do was crack down and implement some harsher stalling calls, and that would have fixed the problem, you know? But they didn't. But
then you got guys bitching that they're getting called for stalling. You know what I mean? Like it's a lose-lose for everybody. But points grappling is effective if you take the time and say, hey, look, we're going to find a format and make it exciting and make guys push. And what I like a lot recently, honestly, to tell you the truth, is Chael Sonnen's event. The underground grappling, or what is it called? I forget what it's called. Submission Underground, SUG, the one he has up in Oregon. Have you ever watched any of those on Fight Pass, man?
No.
I'll tell you, the quality of grappling he has on there ain't great. But first of all, Chael Sonnen's amazing. Like, I would listen to Chael Sonnen, like, read the back of a shampoo bottle and get excited about it. Like, he makes it go. The 5-minute matches, they keep things going. I think if they figured out a way to put some points in there, it would come up with a good way to be that breakthrough match.
Absolutely. Just something for the uneducated audience to see, like, that's where that's going or whatnot. And the very last problem is, like, the whole organization of this sport as well. You know, like, it's usually like a couple of people trying to run this organization or that organization, and they're trying to, like, spread themselves way too thin, you know, nationwide, you know, worldwide, across different countries or whatnot. Like, it just can't be done by a handful of individuals. You need to trust people to handle your business and whatever said, you know, then, like, use these sanction rules or whatnot. You don't necessarily have to be the one there at all times.
Right. Well, Justin, man, we're getting to the end here, man. We got about an hour in. You know, you're awesome. You really are, man. Really, really cool from someone that appreciates talking about grappling with someone that understands grappling. You know what I mean? I had a very enlightened conversation with you, man. And again, I always enjoy talking to people that have been around before the golden age of grappling, before BJJ was in every street corner, and, you know, everybody was doing BJJ and wearing their fancy gis and their fancy rash guards and inverting and doing all the fun stuff. Someone that understands what it was really like to come up in those days, because you kids don't have any idea how hard it was back then.
Oh man, yeah, that's so true.
So just to kind of close it up here, man, just once again, Justin, thank you so much for your time. I have been Kevin Gallagher with the Aces Jiu-Jitsu interview series, podcast, whatever you want to call it. I've had Justin the Punisher Raider on as my guest, multiple-time world champion, ADCC bronze medalist, going against some of the best in the world, and had a great conversation with him. So thank you so much for your time, and everybody, man, we'll check in with you next time, man. Take it easy, guys.
Sounds good. Thank you.
No doubt, brother.